Okay, well, I want to talk today about some of the Wonderland themes that we can build out of this. Forgive the pile of stuff behind me. I'm in the middle of some construction zone stuff, so it'll get cleared up soon enough. The image I have in front of me is not quite Alice in Wonderland. It is obviously an image related to it. It is the mushrooms and the bizarre colors and the seeming misproportion. It's actually called Underland as a title, so it's referring to Alice. It alludes to Alice, but the critter coming out of the center obviously is not from Wonderland, and we have to wonder, what is this weird dark image that's emerging? I'd like to suggest that critter is potentially a reader who is making a misinterpretation. And I'm going to ask us today in this brief video just to talk a little bit or to think a little bit about how far is too far in creating interpretations. How far can you go? And what's the point where you say, no, that's really not there in the text? I want to pose that for us to think about. I'm not going to suggest at this point that there are necessarily right or wrong answers. I'm just going to suggest that if we think about how we form meaning from a text, we can decide what's relevant and what's not. What is Alice and what perhaps is simply the ideas that we have of it. So I want to start by going to some of the text too, just to lay some groundwork. So here's a section of text. This is one of the early chapters, chapter 5, and we have the pigeon, and the pigeon is talking to Alice about the serpent. So Alice, of course, is growing. Her head goes really long on her neck, and her neck doesn't bend easily. So her neck would bend about easily in any direction, like a serpent. She had just succeeded in curving it down into a graceful zigzag and was going to dive in among the leaves, which she found to be nothing but the tops of the trees under which she had been wandering, when a sharp hiss made her draw back in a hurry. A large pigeon had flown into her face and was beating her violently with its wings. "Serpent!" screamed the pigeon. "I'm not a serpent," said Alice indignantly. "Leave me alone." "Serpent!" "I've tried every other way, and nothing seems to suit them." So Alice doesn't know what the pigeon is talking about. I'm going to skip a little bit. And Alice says finally, "But I'm not a serpent, I tell you. I'm a... "Well, what are you?" said the pigeon. "I can see you're trying to invent something." I'm a little girl," said Alice, rather doubtfully, as she remembered the number of changes she had gone through that day, because she has grown really tall, really small, all kinds of things, and now she's got a long neck winding through the trees, so she's not at all certain who she is anymore. "A very likely story indeed," said the pigeon in a tone of deepest content. "I've seen a good many little girls in my time, but never one with such a neck as that. No, you're a serpent, and there's no use denying it. I suppose you'll be telling me next that you never tasted an egg." "Well, I have tasted eggs, certainly," said Alice, who was a very truthful child. "But little girls eat eggs quite as much as serpents do, you know." "Well, there's some logic." "I don't believe it," said the pigeon. "But if they do, why, then, they're a kind of serpent. That's all I can say." This was such a new idea to Alice that she was quite silent for a minute or two, which gave the pigeon the opportunity of adding, "You're looking for eggs. I know that well enough. And what does it matter to me whether you're a little girl or a serpent?" "Well, it matters a good deal to me," said Alice hastily. "I'm not looking for eggs as it happens. If I was, I shouldn't want yours. I don't like them raw." But what we have here is some odd logic that comes from our pigeon, and that is, if you are a serpent, you eat eggs. Therefore, if you eat eggs, you must be a serpent. If I were to do this mathematically or logically, A equals B. Therefore, B must equal A. Maybe logic and math don't quite match up. There must be something in my logical relationships that's off. All A is B is therefore all B A? Not necessarily. Let's see if we can see this played a little differently. I'm going to go to a different chapter. This is from the Mad Tea Party. I think it's probably easier if I try to read it from that side. So I'll just slide over here and look at the right side, and we can look at what it says. You should say what you mean, the March Hare went on. Well, I do, Alice hastily replied. At least I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know. Not the same thing a bit, said the Hatter. Why, you might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see. There's our relationship between the A and the B and the B and the A again. You might as well say, added the March Hare, that what I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like. I want it, I get it. And then the Dormouse said, you might just as well say, added the Dormouse, seemed to be talking to sleep, that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe. And that's where things are getting really odd. It's in language we can see that the logic obviously doesn't make sense. I eat what I see. It's not the same thing at all. So there is an A-B problem here. Are these relationships the same as the one that I spoke of before with the serpent and the girl? Maybe, maybe not. Let's try another one really fast. In this same scene, I slid back over to the right. In this same scene, the Mad Hatter offers a riddle. Why is a raven like a writing desk? Now, if you're a fan of riddles, you want the answer. And Lewis Carroll never gives it. And that's problematic. And he was asked many times afterwards, why and all that kind of stuff. And people have come up with all kinds of answers. You can search the internet and find a ton of them. But why must all riddles have an answer? Why must there be resolution or neat and tidy closure to something? In Wonderland, we've already learned that the neat and tidy ending or the sensical ending is not to be expected. Let's look at another section. This is the Griffin, and the Griffin is talking with the Mock Turtle about their education. And in this particular case, how many hours a day did you do lessons? Said Alice. Oh, I did 10 hours the first day, said the Mock Turtle, 9 the next, and so on. What a curious plan, exclaimed Alice. Well, that's the reason they're called lessons, the Griffin remarked, because they lessen from day to day. Another quite new idea to Alice, just like the Pigeon's one was. She thought it over before she made her next remark. Then the 11th day must have been a holiday. Well, of course it was. So she goes one step further. How'd you manage on the 12th day? Because all the lessons are over then. That's enough about lessons, the Griffin interrupted in a very decided tone. So it shifts topic. We see a lot of the Wonderland characters do that. When Alice tries to bring them to a logical close, they just neatly shift topic and go somewhere else. Why is that? But we do have a fun idea here. They lessen every day, or they lessen from day to day, and there are less of them to learn and less of them which are important to learn as we go. Logic doesn't work. Lessons don't work. We know from school, Alice's school, it doesn't work. The Duchess says at one point in this stock photo, which you can download as wallpaper if you want to for your computer, because everyone has to have a pithy quote that you can get into wallpaper. Everything's got a moral, if only you can find it. Ooh, that sounds kind of clever. But of course, if we put it in context, remember that the Duchess was a little daffy herself, and the Duchess came up with some really bizarre morals and themes for all the things that happened in Wonderland. And that gets us then to kind of a question or an exercise that I'd like to offer. And that is some questions about how we interpret. I'm going to pose a couple of ways to think about the absurdity that we've run into here in the logic of the last 10 minutes. First is, one of three conditions probably exists between Alice and her Wonderland characters. The first, that Wonderland and its characters do not make sense. They are absurd, nonsense, illogical, ridiculous, etc. And therefore, trying to make sense of them is not possible. The second scenario is that Alice's brain doesn't work well enough to make sense of Wonderland. Maybe Wonderland does have a sense to a sensical approach to it, but it's Alice that is at fault. Her brain doesn't function well. You can imagine some characters, even some children, who try to look at it. Alice is, 7.5? She looks at the world and doesn't understand it yet, but as an adult, maybe she will. I don't know that that's going to work with Wonderland, but it is theoretically a solution that it's her brain that's at fault, and that's why she can't make sense of the world. The third solution, the third one, is that the first two are both true. That the world doesn't make sense and our brains are broken and can't make sense of it. Either way, there's a disconnect in the logic between the character, or us, and the world that we're trying to interpret. That's what I want to play with a little bit in terms of building themes, this logic and absurdity. There's lots of things we could play with for building themes here, but that's one to kind of consider for a moment. So we know somehow one of these three hypotheses are likely true. And I'll let you try to make a decision about that, but curious about this in terms of, can we force or compel the world to change to our ideals? Alice tries to reason with the Duchess. She tries to reason with the Mad Hatter. She tries to reason with the Caterpillar. She tries to reason with the Queen of Hearts. None of it seems to work. Can we force the world to fit our idea if the world runs by its own rules, which are somehow separate from our own sensibilities? What is it about the Wonderland world which is broken? Or, just for fun, let's put it another way. What is it about the non-Wonderland world which is more sensible? Let me phrase it one more way to see if I've gone too far. At what point does the absurd become normal? Now, I phrase it that way because I'm thinking of the Wonderland characters. As we go through the story, it seems to me that only the Wonderland characters are fine. Only Alice has got the problem. Alice is the only one that's got issues. And why is that? Because her sensibility of the world, her logic of the world, doesn't match the Wonderland characters. The Wonderland characters are sometimes sad or in pain, but they don't complain about things. Except where Alice is involved. They complain about her. But the nonsense of the rest of the world is totally normal to them. How do we, if we're Alice, wake people to their absurdity, to show them the world no longer makes sense, that the world is no longer just? I don't know. Okay. Maybe Lewis Carroll doesn't offer us any solutions, but maybe he offers us approaches that don't work. Maybe that's the thing we're talking about. Now, if we had done this as a regular class, we would have done some exercises with some fairy tales and tried to find some themes and things. I'm going to ask this question: how do we decide a theme? Now, a theme, I'm going to suggest is two things. One, it's not a single word. Don't tell me logic is a theme. Logic is a topic. What Carroll says about logic, that's a theme. His comment on it. The moral, as it were. Not all themes are morals. There are morals that are themes, A and B, but not all themes are necessarily morals. They just might be statements, arguments, points, things like that. But at any rate, the first part is it's not a topic. The second part is it's built from the text. Somewhere in the text of this work is a message, assuming there is one. And we need to find it from the text. I mean, we just can't bring our own idea in and say, well, the theme of Alice in Wonderland is my grandmother's sweet potato pie is the best ever. It doesn't make much sense. Well, there we are trying to make sense of a nonsensical book, but we'll get to that later. Okay. I have for you some theme statements. I'm going to throw them up here on the screen and let you think about them. do I, at any point across these 15 theme statements, do I go too far? That's my question. Have I left the text? Have I made a statement that you don't think that the book makes? Let's find out. Here's the first one. The story is a happy nonsense fantasy for children without any real moral or theme to learn. That's it. There is no moral or theme. Just read it as a fun story and be done with it. Number 2. Alice teaches us that children will daydream and think nonsense ideas. Not too far yet. Number 3. Alice shows us that the minds of children are different from adults. Number 4. Alice's Wonderland reveals some of the nonsense of our own world. Possible? 5. Wonderland makes fun of the adult world's logic and learning. Well, we just looked over some of it. 6. Wonderland shows us that some logic, especially in language, is not so logical. 7. Wonderland reveals the powerlessness of logic and sense as it applies Victorian thinking to politics and education. 8. Carol makes fun of Victorian thinking and social institutions by revealing its absurdity or lack of logic. 9. Carol's humorous attacks on culture through a children's story shows how the story grows and stays with readers through their adult lives. It's a little different from a theme, maybe. It's explaining its timelessness, maybe. Number 10. Carol attacks adult social institutions and manners through a naive protagonist who finds them as absurd as the world she encounters. 11. Carol's attacks on social manners and common sense resonate with us through today's society. Wonderland is a timeless satire on our Western world. 12. Early in the story, Alice learns how useless school lessons can be, echoing the complaints of contemporary American students who know how rarely school lessons fit the real world. That's a slightly different push. 13. Ironically, the absurdities Alice discovers become better teachers of how the world functions than anything traditional education can offer. That's kind of interesting in terms of how it pushes into what learning is. Let's go further in that. 14. In terms of learning, Wonderland demonstrates that social movements of anxiety and crises are more educational than traditional schooling. One more. Carol argues that social absurdities and injustices are more educational than traditional school. The politics of the Duchess might mirror the public sentiment favoring and ostracizing comedians in our cancel culture. The Queen's random and spontaneous executions of her victims echo the accusations of the BLM movement against similar injustice. Am I allowed to do that? As a theme? Is that what this might be about? I'm not sure how far we can go, or rather, I'm not going to make a claim about how far literary interpretation can go. I do know that Alice feels injustice, and some of the characters in Wonderland feel injustice at meeting her and encountering her. I do know that there's something as a mismatch between what we see of the world and what the world actually is. somewhere in there are some themes and lessons. Are those themes and lessons that we're allowed to draw from a Victorian-era children's book of 160 years ago? Or does that go too far? It's not my goal yet to help you necessarily determine what the right answer is, whatever that right answer might be. It is my goal to get you thinking about it and perhaps, dare I say, philosophizing a little bit about what the role of literature is, what our goal as readers is, and what it is we're supposed to do with it. And I'm setting us up for the next book, which of course is Flatland. It'll be a slightly harder read, also Victorian, about the same length or maybe even a little shorter. But it's definitely going to have a much more applicable approach to everything. And so as you think through Alice and think through what I've talked about here, maybe you'll have some ideas that you can post on the forums and elsewhere. Thanks. Bye.